Hi, welcome to the Coffee Channel. I'm JP and today I'm going to be showing you 5 ways to massively improve your espresso. And this will have a knock-on effect on all of your espresso-based drinks, your milk drinks, your cappuccinos, your flat whites, and your lattes. So let's go with the first step, which is water. So espresso is composed 90% of water. So it's surprising that until recently, not that much attention has been paid to the quality of the water going in. Now, for home users, we've often got too much bicarbonate in our water, and this inhibits the extraction. Now, there are 2 ways we can get over that. The first of which is to get one of these. Now, full disclosure here, I do know the creator of this. It's the only home sort of water filter system that actually gets rid of the bicarbonate, but it's adjustable for different levels. So if you live in an area with very high bicarbonate levels, you can set it for that level. It comes with a little testing strip. If you live in an area where the water's a bit softer, you can adjust it down for that level as well. The only problem with it is that it won't do anything if you haven't got enough magnesium or calcium in your water. Now, magnesium and calcium act as flavour carriers effectively. We're better off having magnesium than we are calcium, because calcium can damage your equipment when mixed with bicarbonate. So if you haven't got enough magnesium in your water in the first place, your espresso isn't going to taste that good even once you've filtered all the bicarbonate out. Which leads us on to the second method of producing your water, which is to make the water yourself. Okay, so to make the perfect water yourself, especially good if you want to get really geeky about it, or if you live in an area where the water hasn't got enough minerals, then you need a few things. Number 1, you need distilled water. Number 2, you need baking soda. And number 3, you need Epsom salts. Don't worry that the distilled water will say something on the lines of not suitable for drinking. This is just to stop people drinking it as their only source of water, because most water will have minerals in it, and drinking water with no minerals in it at all is actually bad for you, but only over a very long period of time. Now, we're going to be adding the minerals into this water to make our coffee good. So here's a basic recipe to get you started. So you need to dissolve 1.7 grams of baking soda in 1 litre of your distilled water. Then you need to dissolve 2.4 grams of Epsom salts in a separate litre of distilled water. What you're going to do then is add these 2 concentrates to pure distilled water in a separate litre bottle. So you've got 909 grams of pure distilled water, and you're going to take 40 grams of the water that had the baking soda in it and add that to the 909 grams of pure water, and then add 51 grams of the water that had Epsom salts in it. You can experiment with different quantities of these minerals. You might find that if you like slightly darker coffees, that lower levels of the minerals, particularly the Epsom salts, will result in a better tasting coffee. For longer filter brews, you also might find that lower mineral levels will work better. Step 2 is upgrade your taste buds. If you go into a coffee shop and talk to any coffee professional for long enough, the terms extraction, over extraction, under extraction will probably come up. What we mean by this is actually how much of the coffee that you put in to the espresso machine gets into your actual cup. Now, over the years, people have found that the preference is for around the extraction of about 20%. You can go a bit higher than that, you can sometimes go a bit lower, but drastically lower than that and drastically higher will usually taste quite bad. Different coffees and different grinders and different machines will have different rates at which they can extract, but it's usually around the 20% mark. It might be slightly more, 22% maybe on some coffees. Lighter coffees, you can sometimes extract slightly more without them tasting bad, but what you'll find is that under 20% and dramatically under 20%, you'll get nasty acidic flavours and hollow flavours that are weak and not very nice. If you go over about 22% extraction, then that means you're over extracting the coffee and you're going to get smoky, woody, bitter flavours. But when I mean bitter, I don't mean the flavour of like bitter lemon, I mean the flavour of dark chocolate, that bitter flavour of dark chocolate with not much sugar in it. Now let's try a couple of coffees and see what we find when we over and under extract them on purpose. So I've purposely under extracted this coffee, so it's come out in around 18 seconds in a 2:1 ratio. So I've got 18 grams in, I've got 36 grams out, and it's come out in about 18 seconds. Now, that's too short generally for coffee to taste good. But this is where upgrading your taste buds comes in. What you do is you taste these bad coffees, so it will give you an idea of exactly what a bad coffee, an under extracted coffee, tastes like. And then later on, when we over extract coffee, we'll know exactly what an over extracted coffee tastes like. So that we've got that programmed into our brains, and we know when we've gone too fine on the grind or too coarse on the grind. When we've gone too coarse on the grind, we've under extracted it. When we go too fine on the ground, then we've over extracted it. So let's have a taste of this now. Okay, so what I've got here is far too much acidity. So it's a bit like a grapefruit that's not quite ripe. You've not got those balancing sugars to make it taste good. It's just a lot of acidity up front, a little bit thin. It doesn't taste as thick as it should do. The viscosity is not there. So what we need to do next is we need to grind a bit finer and keep everything else the same. So we'll be looking to make it go a few seconds longer, maybe up to 23, 24 seconds. Taste it again and see if it tastes better. Okay, so I've kept everything else the same with this next coffee. I've ground much finer. So I've kept it 18 grams going in of coffee from the grinder going into the machine, and 36 grams of espresso coming out. So simple 2:1 ratio. I've kept everything the same apart from the grind. And I've gone up several steps on the 𝘀𝗺𝗺𝗺 grinder here, and it's taken 35 seconds. Now, that's usually outside the range of what I consider is going to give me a good espresso. Usually anything over maybe 32, 33 seconds with most coffees is going to taste bad. Now, again, it's worth tasting this, as I said earlier, because this will tell you what over extraction tastes like. So let's have a taste. Okay, so this isn't really over extracted, but it's got some of those smoky, woody flavours in there. That are undesirable in coffee unless you really like that sort of thing. What I'm finding is it's a very bitter flavour. As I said before, that tastes a very, very dark chocolate, 90% chocolate. No acidity, there's no acidity in there at all that's discernible, but it's very hollow. It kind of, the mouthfeel just disappears very long. It doesn't stay in your mouth very long. You don't get that sense of a lingering finish on it like maybe you get on a nice wine. You get this hollow, smoky flavour, almost like an ashtray. It smells a bit ashtray-like to it. So what we do now is we'll then drop the grind back, taste it again, and see how that tastes, because what you usually find is that the espresso that you make with the highest extraction, the finest grind, that still tastes good and doesn't taste over-extracted, will be the best one. So our third coffee, I've dialed the grind back a little bit coarser because we over extracted the second coffee. It's somewhere between our first coffee, which was under extracted, and our second coffee, which was over extracted. Now let's have a taste and see what it's like. Okay, that's pretty perfect actually. We've not got any of that smokiness now, but we've also not got the acidity to the same extent that we had in the previous coffee. Now, you always get quite a bit of acidity in light roast specialty coffee because that's the nature of the coffee. Those are the flavours that we want. But it should be balanced by sweetness. Now, the sweetness we've got here, a bit like when you drink Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is very acidic, but because it's got lots of sugar in it, it tastes nice. And it's the same thing here. The sugar balances out the acidity. The acidity hasn't gone anywhere, it's just been balanced by you extracting more flavours from the coffee. Now, the one problem you may have with a home setup, and I've experienced this when I've trained people in their home environments, is that your grinder you'll grind finer and you'll grind finer, and sometimes the coffee will actually go the opposite way. It will stop coming out quicker, and you'll be absolutely tearing your hair out because you'll be thinking, why is it under extracting now when I've ground finer than the previous one? That's one of the limitations of home grinders. We'll be talking about that later on in the 5th step, but for now, a good point is to try and give your grinder some time between grinds, and that will help it to cool down a little bit. You'll stop the coffee beans from getting too hot and becoming more soluble. We'll talk about that in the next step. Step 3, and I can't overemphasize the importance of this step, is weigh everything. Now, back in the early days of specialty coffee, there was this notion of something that people called the God shot, and there was this coffee shot, this espresso, that was so much better than anything else you tried before. And you only get one of these in maybe every 20 espressos that you made. And the reason, looking back on this, that we used to get this problem was no one actually weighed anything. So there's no consistency. They were relying on the grinder to dispense the right amount of grounds. They were relying on the coffee machine and the volumetrics in it to put the right amount of water through the espresso. Now the problem then is these things were horribly inaccurate. There's no chance you're going to get anywhere near the same consistency you get when you're weighing something. Now, all you need is a set of these scales, digital scales, accurate to 0.1 of a gram, and use them for both your input and your output. These are about £30. You can buy more expensive ones. I go for something that's big enough to get your portafilter on it and that will weigh at least 1,000 grams, because portafilters generally weigh about 600 grams or more. So you want to be able to put your portafilter on it and put the coffee into the portafilter and get an accurate reading. And then you can use the same scale for your actual espresso itself. Now, if you're in a shop environment, you probably invest in a larger permanent scales for your portafilter and have a separate smaller one for your espresso machine, but that's not needed for home use. Okay, so when you weigh things, what you then do is then you can tell whether the coffee is under extracting or over extracting just by the amount of time and the weight going through it. So we'll stick with a simple brew ratio like 2 to 1, 18 grams in, 36 grams out, or if you're using a smaller basket, 16 grams in, 32 grams out, and we'll keep everything the same each time apart from the grind setting. So we know that we're putting the same amount of coffee in each time and we're getting roughly the same amount of coffee out at the end result. The reason I say roughly here is it's very difficult to accurately stop it at exactly the same weight each time. You might be like 1 gram either side out, but that shouldn't make too much difference. Now this will dramatically improve your coffee because you'll get the consistency that you maybe were lacking before and you're wondering why your grind setting was going all over the place, where you're probably putting more coffee in or too little coffee in, or you're letting the coffee run too far or too little. It's really, really difficult to judge this stuff by eye. Now, I've made tens of thousands of coffees over the years in a coffee shop and in my home environment, and I've still not got the art of telling exactly how much coffee is in my portafilter just by looking at it. Okay, I can't get anywhere near 1 gram accuracy, but 1 gram would be enough to make a massive difference to your extraction. Okay, so we've looked at weighing. How does this work in practice? Well, what we do is we start off with a set recipe, just like you would with a recipe for anything. And it's worth pointing out, about going back to the God shot, that the recipes are really important and the consistency of a recipe is really important. If you imagine trying to bake bread but just guessing how much of the ingredients you had to put in, you'd never get very good results, and you might end up with the God shot type of bread that 1 in every 20 loaves you bake was actually correct and tasted good, the others were absolutely terrible. Yet people doing that with coffee for years. So what we do is we keep our input dose the same each time, we keep our output dose the same each time, and we just change the time. How do we change the time? We do this by grinding finer or grinding coarser, which brings us to step 4, grind finer for more extraction, grind coarser for less extraction. You can change the extraction of the coffee by grinding finer or coarser. The coffee bean as it is doesn't have that much surface area relative to its size, so if you put a coffee bean in hot water, you wouldn't extract much from it. As you grind finer and finer, you present more surface area to the water and therefore get a higher extraction rate. So we keep everything the same except for the grind. Now this is a simple rule. You can adjust other parameters later on, but this is the easiest way to get good tasting espresso. So we'll start with the dose. The dose needs to be the size of your basket. So if you've got a 16-gram basket, go for a 16-gram dose. If you've got an 18-gram basket, an 18-gram dose, 20-gram basket, you guessed it, 20 grams. Sticking in the middle of the basket's range, which is what the stated dose on the basket is the easiest way to get the best extraction to start with. Then you're going to look for a 2-to-1 ratio. So what we're talking about there is twice the amount of espresso is coming out to what you put in. So with a 16-gram basket, we'll be looking for 32 grams out, 18 grams 36, 20 grams 40. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but most light roast espressos will taste pretty good at this ratio. They'll have plenty of thickness and viscosity in that mouthfeel that you get from traditional espresso, but it'll be long enough to bring out those fruity flavours. Okay, so if we start with the coffee like earlier, and we ground fairly coarse, and we've got a 20-second extraction or less, it's probably not going to taste that good, but we can try it if we want to upgrade our taste buds like we were talking about earlier. But if you've already gone through those steps, you're probably best off throwing it away and getting somewhere about 25 seconds to start with. Have a little bit of a taste of it and then grind finer. Now, remember that there will be some retention in your grinder. So when you change the grind setting, you'll need to actually run the grinder with a few beans through it to get rid of any retention. Otherwise, you'll find that some of your grounds from the previous grind will still be in there. So instead of having 18 grams of coffee ground setting, say 1.6, you'll have 16 grams of coffee at your new setting 1.6 and 2 grams of coffee at your previous setting. Now this 𝗀𝗃43 that we've got here hasn't got much retention, about 1 gram, but you'll find some coffee grinders have up to 3 or 4 grams of retention. So you're going to have to lose a bit of coffee, you're going to have to waste a bit of coffee, otherwise your grind setting is going to be all over the place, you're not going to get a very even extraction. Okay, so once you've got it up to that sort of 25-second level, just keep grinding finer and finer, like we did in step 2, until you get to the over-extracted level. Keep timing it, and then drop it back slightly from that. And then when it starts tasting good, that is going to be your best extraction and your best tasting espresso. Which brings us to our final step, which is step 5. And this is a bit of an unusual one, because it's understanding the limitations of your own equipment. Now most home users will have home equipment, obviously, and it won't necessarily work quite as well as in a specialty coffee shop. Now what I mean by that is the grind is probably not going to be as expensive, the burrs are going to be smaller, and it's going to be some limitations to how fine you can grind. Now the problem with this is that some coffees you just won't be able to grind fine enough to get a good extraction from. You'll go finer and finer and finer, and it will still be coming out in about 20 seconds at a 2-to-1 ratio. And the burrs will be clipping, and you're not going to want to go any finer than that because you might damage your equipment. Okay, what do you do here? Well, you've got to be aware of the limitations of your equipment, and so you're going to have to go and change one of the parameters that you wouldn't normally do. So I always say stick with that 2-to-1 ratio unless you really have to. And what we can do is we can change the ratio slightly to run more water through the coffee. Now what that does is that extracts more at a given grind setting. So if we were putting, say, 16 grams in and getting 32 out, we might change it so that putting 16 grams in and getting 38 grams out. Now it might run for a couple of seconds longer, so you might end up with a 22-second extraction rather than a 20-second one at your finest grind level. But what you'll get is more water going through the coffee, and that more water will extract more from that coffee. Now the downside is the viscosity of the espresso will go down slightly, it will lose a little bit of its thickness and that mouthfeel that you get with a 2-to-1 ratio. The upside is the clarity of flavours can sometimes improve. That's one potential advantage of running a different brew ratio. Now, there's something of personal preference here, but when all other avenues have been explored and you haven't got anywhere with your grind fineness, just increase the amount of water running through the coffee. Once you get too far, it will start to taste watery and it won't have much flavour. But you can go up to probably about 40 grams from a 16 gram dose, or 45 from an 18 gram dose maybe. 50 plus from a 20 gram dose, and that will still give you a nice extraction, nice clarity of flavour, but it's a bit of a last resort. Okay, so then to summarise, our 5 steps are: number 1, sort your water. So make sure that your water has the right minerals in it. If you need to make it yourself, try out our recipe. Number 2, upgrade your taste buds. Taste under extracted and over extracted coffees and correctly extracted coffees so that you know when you're making errors, you know when it's tasting bad. Step 3 is weigh and time everything so you get consistency. Weigh your input dose, weigh your output dose, and time it. Only that way will you be able to achieve step 4, which is to grind finer for more extraction, grind coarser for less extraction, and when you're timing everything, you should be able to get a really good tasting espresso. Our last step is to be aware of the limitations of your equipment and adjust accordingly. So if you're using a home grinder that won't go fine enough, you maybe need to make the brew ratio a little bit longer and run more water through the coffee to get a full and even extraction. That's all from us today. Hope you enjoyed the video. Any questions or comments, put them in the comments section below. Like and subscribe if you want to. See you next time.